What we're gonna do right here is go back, way back into time.
A lesser known aircraft that was the big brother to the Fairchild C-119 flying boxcar. It was developed by Fairchild. The C-82 was intended as a heavy lift cargo aircraft that was to succeed the pre-war civilian designs like the Curtiss C-46 Commando and the Douglas C-47 Dakota. Using non-critical materials in its construction, primarily plywood and steel, and they did that so it didn't compete with the production of combat aircraft. But by early 1943, changes in specifications resulted in plans for an all-metal aircraft. The aircraft was designed for a number of roles that included cargo carrier, troop transport, parachute drop, medical evacuation, and glider towing. It featured a rear loading ramp with wide doors and an empennage set 14 feet off the ground. That's pretty high. It permitted trucks and trailers to back up to the doors without obstructions from any direction. Only one prototype, and that flew on September 10th, 1944. The aircraft were built at the Fairchild factory in Hagerstown, Maryland, with deliveries that began in 1945 and ended in September 1948. However, problems surfaced almost immediately. The aircraft was found to be underpowered, its airframe inadequate for the heavy lifting it was intended to perform. I've heard the same complaint at home. As a result, the Air Force turned to Fairchild for a solution to the C-82's shortcomings. A redesign was quickly performed under the designation C-82B, which would overcome all the C-82A's initial problems. The C-82A was first flown in 1944, but the initial delivery wasn't until June 1945, and as a result, only a few entered service before the end of the war. And in the end, only 223 C-82As were built, a small number relative to other wartime production cargo aircraft, and most were used for cargo troop transport, although a few were deployed for parachute operations or towing military gliders. And then once in service, pilots found the C-82A to be severely underpowered, poor visibility from the cockpit, and if it had one engine out while carrying a load, the aircraft could not maintain level flight, and this resulted in several crashes, including one at Barksdale Air Force Base that resulted in the death of one passenger. A redesign rectifying the aircraft's main deficiencies, known as the C-82B that we mentioned earlier, would eventually result in the Fairchild C-119 flying boxcar that we know. And that was actually introduced in 1949. I didn't realize that. But in 1946, believe it or not, the United States Postal Service explored the concept of flying post offices using highly modified C-82s, which would operate similarly to those on trains, where mail would be sorted by clerks and put in bags and then transferred to trucks on landing. In 1948, a C-82 was fitted with track gears that were the landing gear, similar to the tracks on a bulldozer, crawler tractor. That allowed landings on unpaved primitive runways. And of course, the track gear proved unserviceable in operational use and was quickly abandoned. In January 1948, the C-82 with the 62nd Troop Carrier Group deployed from McCord Air Force Base to the Arctic during Project Yukon, and they used that to gain experience operating in extreme cold weather. During the Berlin blockade, I did not know this, but 5 C-82 aircraft carried large, disassembled, earth-moving equipment into the city that enabled the construction of the Berlin-Tegel Airport during the fall of 1948. While relatively unsuccessful and produced in small numbers, the C-82A served as a developmental precursor to the C-119 and also, to some degree, the Fairchild C-123 provider. Eventually, the C-82s were retired from the United States Air Force inventory in 1954. They did see some follow-on service. For instance, TWA operated one, and they used that to deliver engines to an airliner aircraft that might have broke down where there wasn't available engines to replace with, and it would fly in there, and it included the jetpack that was set on top of the aircraft. And then you had some other countries, Mexico, Chile, I think Nicaragua, that purchased them too and used them for cargo. And the last cargo C-82 retired sometime in the mid-1980s, I believe. And the movie by Jimmy Stewart, and I think they did a remake of it, Flight of the Phoenix, where the C-82 crashes in the desert and they have to survive. And then they realize the only way they're going to survive is if they take one of the engines with the boom, took the wings, attached them to the boom, and flew out of the desert back to where civilization is, and they can not perish in the desert. It's a pretty good movie. The unfortunate side of that was the stunt pilot was killed as a result of the aircraft hitting hard and I think flipping or breaking in two. But anyway, the C-82, it's not good looking, and it was not very popular. They didn't make a lot of them when you compare it to a lot of other aircraft in production at that time. But it did serve as a follow-on to the C-119. They took what was good, removed what was bad, and the C-119 flying boxcar, as you know, went on to have a very successful life. Fighting fires, was used as a gunship, used as civilian-owned cargo aircraft, and there's a lot of them to see in the museums around the country. And in fact, speaking of that, there is in Great Bull, Wyoming, there is 2 fuselages of C-82s, and it might be Great Bull, Montana, I'm not sure. And then you have the Pima Air Museum that has one on display. And then, of course, the United States Air Force Museum in Dayton, Ohio, they have a very fine specimen that on occasion you can actually go inside of. So, not a very popular aircraft, certainly not one you would brag about flying, but like a lot of things, pilots fall in love with their first aircraft, right? So, it's about it on the C-82. I hope you enjoyed this. I really like making them and doing profiles once in a while on aircraft. So, thank you for joining me, and we'll see you soon. I've got other interviews in the pipeline. I have projects in the pipeline. It's about the beginning of air show season. I'm going to be traveling to Lemoore Naval Air Station, California, Travis Air Force Base, California, and I believe I might be available to get into Idaho for the Mountain Home Air Force Base Air Show, home of the gunfighters. Okay, everybody. Well, we'll talk to you later, and I hope you did enjoy the show. I enjoyed making it.